Holy Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he, Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to Jesus, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And he went back to sleep. No, I don't know if that's what happened there, but I could just imagine that. And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of the Lord. You may be seated. As those words were being read from Corinthians, weren't they inspiring? I mean, to hear the eloquence with which Paul spoke, and it was so real. He describes the Christian life as not necessarily a cakewalk. Maybe one that's been spilled on the sidewalk, if you're walking on that kind of cake. Not necessarily a success story, if you will, in the sense that they were beaten and imprisoned and ridiculed and slandered and hated and run out of town. Paul was stoned and left for dead. He was whiplashed 39 times. He received those 39 stripes 3 separate times on his back. Can you imagine what his back must have looked like? Using a cat of nine tails, a Roman cat of nine tails that strips the flesh away. He was whipped, beaten, stoned, left for dead. Now, in those days, now remember this, the Jewish people and also the Islamic people still have a custom today. If you go back, it goes back to the Old Testament, and that's why they're all linked. We think it's so barbaric that they'll take a person caught in the act, form a circle around them, and stone them to death. But that's the Old Testament law. That's what they did. The woman caught in adultery was brought kneeling before Christ. She was about to be stoned. According to the law, she was guilty. She was caught in the act of adultery. And so they asked Jesus, what are you going to do with this case? And Jesus said, "Let the one who is without sin in this circle cast the first stone." Now, you have to remember, she was probably the town prostitute, most possibly quite so. And maybe some of those men dropping the rocks there had been with her. Have you ever thought about that side of the story? Maybe. I'm just thinking out loud. Is it possible that could have happened? Answer yes or no. It's possible, yeah. It's also possible that she was just an honorable woman who had slipped up once and was honorably married and made one mistake and was being killed for it. And if all of us lived that way, How many of us would be alive today if one mistake you made in your life, you could be killed for it? In the Old Testament, it's asking your parents. Now, I'd be dead on that one. How about you? Oh, man, I had such a smart mouth. My daddy once told me, he said, son, I'll beat you to within an inch of your life. I said, what's that mean? And then he showed me. Don't ever ask that question. My dad was tough. Lord, he was a welder, had forearms like Popeye. And when he gave you a whooping, you were whooped. You knew it. But Jesus was literally, as he stood in their midst, asleep in the boat, feeling just fine with the torrential storm. Now, how many of you have ever been on a lake and you decided you'd go fishing, and somehow about midday your fortunes turned, and you're caught in the middle of the lake with a boat, and you're wondering, how the heck am I going to get out of this? What was I thinking? Raise your hand if you're guilty. Look on the back row, y'all. We got some guilty victims here. And you'll think, I'm going to die when it happens. I mean, it's happened to me, and Lord have mercy, it comes up so fast, and the wind just makes the lake just become like a monster. You're thinking, where did these waves come from? And that's because there are certain lakes that are like Lake Mathis, which is shaped exactly the same as the Sea of Galilee. Same is shaped like a harp. And for some reason, the winds come down in those low areas, and it's a very low area, if you will. That's why I'm still praying for rain. When my boat dock is touching water, I'll stop praying. But I got a boat dock that's literally right now a tree house. So pardon me, but I'm praying for another 2 or 3 feet of lake water. How about you? Anyway, then there's always the ocean. I don't need to worry about that one, because it's always going to be, right? So Jesus has authority over the storm. Well, what's that got to do with me today? I know. What about your life? How many of you have ever had a financial storm at any point in your life, a financial storm? And I'm looking, for me, it would have been the stock failure that happened when I lost a little over $300,000 back in the 90s. Y'all remember that one? And the housing debacle that happened in the late 80s, 88 I think it was. But a lot of people lost a lot of money in the stock market. There's people probably in this community, or not too far from here, that might have lost a penny or two in Enron. Remember that company? Number one stock. Number one. Everybody was in Enron. Oh, we didn't know they were cooking the books. Right? And that was about the time I was studying to be an Edward D. Jones rep, and I was going to jump into that business. But I decided, when I saw what it did to all the people around, I was living in Horton, Texas when the crash happened, when the Enron crashed. A lot of our members in my church had their entire retirement wrapped up in Enron. That was their future. So there's financial storms, yes. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you say Job was going through one? We read about Job today. Was he going through a financial storm? He lost everything. Can storms be physical? Have you ever been through a bad situation physically? For me, it was through stupidity that I had a bike wreck, and I hit the concrete going 42 miles an hour without a helmet. And so I caught myself with both hands, breaking both hands, broke 4 ribs, fractured my skull, which is probably what saved my life because my head's hard. But 14 altogether bones affected, 8 major bones, including my clavicle. And this was just a little over 2 years ago. And I thought I had killed myself. Matter of fact, as I was flying over the handlebars, I thought, this is going to be a funny way to go through the pearly gates. What am I going to tell my relatives when I get to heaven? I was riding an electric bike and it got away from me. Yeah, right. Well, that's what happened. Yeah, the brake and the accelerator were right next to each other, and I instead of slowing down to get to the curb, I sped up. And it launched me like a monkey off of a palm tree that's been held in high wind. I was flying. So anyway, make a long story short, that was right during COVID, and I did not want to go to the hospital. So I spent the next 72 hours without pain pills at home. Thank God the walls were made of stone. My neighbors couldn't hear me hollering out. So I've had physical storms. Have you ever had a physical storm? I'd call that one of them. Some people get bad news from the doctor. Is that a physical storm? Yes. Some of us have family storms. Now, it may not be your issue, but you get so wrapped up because it's a relative that their problem becomes your problem. And let's have true confessions today. Anybody here that's alive has got to have at least one relative that fits that category. So if you fit that one, raise your hand. Let's all confess with, yes, I have a relative that needs special attention. But I love them anyway. And I'm praying that God will somehow break through the turmoil that they create for themselves. Because a lot of times we create our own hell. You know? I know young people that go to work, they look like they've been hit with a sledgehammer. I worked with them. I'd go to work, I thought, man, Lord have mercy, what did you do last night? Well, they'd been out all night, and they're young, and they did what some of us might have done a little bit of when I was in college. Not much of it. I mean, I was a saint. No, I wasn't. You know, the problem with the word saint is the word ain't right in the middle of it. And so you see all of this, you realize these kids are just needing attention, and everybody goes out, but in truth, we're all looking for a relationship. And so many young people get in bad relationships because they shop in the wrong places. If you're looking for a relationship, the last place to find it would be in a bar. Right? That'd be the last place you'd look. The first place would be church. That's where I'd look. First place would be around God's people. And I'm not saying these people are not God's people, because the bartenders are the best psychologists in the world. They hear everybody's problems. Bless their hearts. I hope they get tipped well. Because, you know, everybody spills their guts to a bartender. Operator, would you help me make this call? Right? So we've all been there. But here's the point. God sets us free from whatever storm we're in, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, where we need a healing, whether it's relationship storms with our grandkids, and we wonder, how the heck did they get in this situation? Whether it's the turmoil that they bring upon their own lives, not realizing that actions have consequences. And boy, we all had to learn that lesson in life. And just as surely as we go through the terrible twos, people have to go through their period of what I call sowing their wild oats. It's a normal part of life. Well, now, some people don't stay there very long, thank God. But just letting it loose and letting it fly, and then sometimes we do stupid stuff. And that's how a lot of kids die. Trying to be famous on Facebook, on the Grand Canyon with that one snapshot that was their last snapshot as they fell 4,000 feet to their death. So we live in a society that wants to be first in all things, and so we want to be first on video with TikTok or on YouTube, and it's all competition. Churches are competing against each other, and it's become a popularity contest, and so in order to win more adherents, they change the rules that have been present in church life for centuries, not just decades. I'm talking. Righteousness has never been assailed by the church and its leaders. Say that with me. Righteousness has never been assailed in the history of Christianity until today. Righteousness is ridiculed. Think about it. The church is attacked as being an agent of hate. And love is our aim. Christ is love. God is love. There's no hatred in God. If people would just realize how positive the Christian faith is, more people will be drawn to it. For God is the God of the impossible. He saves the unsavable. He pardons the unpardonable. He forgives the unforgivable. Think about it. Moses murdered, and God allowed him to lead. David was an adulterer who killed Bathsheba's husband by placing him on the front lines. Had him slain so he could have his wife. He lost his child because of that, but later on, David was called a man after God's own heart. You know Moses slew the Egyptian, a murderer. God gave him the Ten Commandments. You know that all of us are flawed. The Apostle Paul persecuted the church, and yet he wrote 1/4 of the New Testament. So we're sinners in need of grace, but thanks be to God, Jesus Christ has come to set us free from whatever storm you find yourself in, whether spiritual, physical, emotional, or really a real storm, like some of the few that I've been in. That night in Tulsa when there were 3 tornadoes around our apartment and there was suction on the window and I thought the apartment was going to explode. And hailstones this big around were hitting the roof and it sounded like a 10-pound sack of sugar hitting it. And when I drove 3 miles, metal buildings were twisted like licorice sticks and there were trucks upside down on top of those buildings with their wheels in the air. And that happened 2 miles from my house. Going further south, it hit Turley, and it formed a triangle around us, and that explained those big, round hail balls that dropped. One of them hit right in front of my Volvo. I had an 83 Volvo, and that hailstone hit right in front of the hood and stuck in the mud, and it looked like a globe from the witch's Wizard of Oz, a perfect globe, perfectly. It didn't smash. I thought, look at that. It didn't explode like the ones hitting the asphalt. And I hollered at my wife and said, I'm going to run out there and get it. She said, take the umbrella. I wanted to put that in the freezer so I can show that, to somebody. Nobody would believe that in Texas because everything's big in Texas. And I had a hailstone the size of a volleyball. So I've been in storms. I was at my dad's house when a tornado went by within half a mile and you could hear the trees snapping. We got in the car and all the houses were wrecks. Roofs were gone, trees were flat, power lines were down, and we were driving over hot wires. We had to get out of there. So I've been around tornadoes. I was in a meeting with the district superintendent one night, and I thought they had a storm in that church. When I left that church meeting, I went 3 miles north and a tornado had flattened everything in its path. Trees, trailer houses, everything. So I've been around tornadoes and they're pretty rough. And I've been around bad weather. But you know what the greatest storm is in life? Spiritual. When you feel out of control and you lose your mooring and somehow or other you get disconnected with God, that's the time to be concerned. That's the time you got to realize there's somebody in the boat bigger than you and he can take care of your storms. And all of us need to realize that. Jesus Christ is in the boat with you, the boat of life. He said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Let me ask you one question before I close. Do you think Jesus has lost any of his power? It's not a loaded question. Do you think Jesus has lost any of his power? Can he do today what he did then? Is he still a healer? Absolutely. And sometimes I think he still delivers people. We just need to take our burdens to the cross and leave them there. We've got to let Jesus Christ do the healing, let him do the deliverance, and we just do the praying. Amen. And he'll take care of the rest. That's my sermon.